Hello and welcome to Your Employment Matters. I'm Beverly Williams and I'm here to help you navigate your career. This is for anyone who's searching for their dream job or promotion, or perhaps you're just looking to hang on to the job you have. Today's work environments are multi-generational, multi-religious, multinational, multiracial, and multi-gender identity. Add market disruptors like Amazon and Lyft, along with the addition of AI, and it's easy to see why finding and keeping a job is such a challenge. Employment success and even employment survival depend on your ability to adapt. That's why my goal for this 30-minute podcast is to first advocate embracing change and differences, and second, to encourage you to proactively assume responsibility for your career. Get your work week off to a good start by listening to Your Employment Matters every Monday. Find out how to own your career and get the best practices for making your employment matter. COVID-19 has impacted our lives unexpectedly and immeasurably. Workplace interactions with coworkers have been particularly limited. Some we miss, some coworkers we don't. However, whether in person or remote, the need to connect with and engage employees has remained a critical aspect of leadership and delivery of services to clients, customers, and employees as well. Now, individuals employed in HR roles, like many others, have had to adapt to what I call our new employment reality. Now, just imagine as an HR professional trying to manage one or more of the following: hiring, staff development, employee and or labor relations, employee benefits, and compensation. Imagine being responsible for any one or more of these functions. Then imagine being responsible for them and handling them remotely. Now, depending on the employer, another function that may or may not be positioned in the HR organization is diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI for short. Now, against the recent backdrop of social unrest in this country, there's been an increased focus by organizations on the importance of demonstrating a commitment to DEI. My guest, Rita Mitjans, who is a native of Cuba, lives DEI personally and professionally. Rita moved to the United States at age 7. Years later, she earned a bachelor's degree in marketing from St. John's University and an MBA in finance and general management from the Harvard Business School. She has more than 35 years of leadership experience and served on the board of advisors of Catalyst, which, so you know, is a global nonprofit organization that works with hundreds of companies across the world to accelerate women into leadership. Rita is also a former member of the Council of Global Diversity and Inclusion Executives of the Conference Board. Welcome, Rita, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you, Beverly, for that very kind welcome.
My pleasure. So let's talk about DEI and how we can turn related efforts into opportunities. But before we go, I should have mentioned this before we started. Can you tell me a little bit about the Conference Board? I looked it up and I read what it said, but I wasn't quite sure that I understood exactly how it works, and because there are different components as I read.
Yes. So the Conference Board, think of it as almost like a professional membership organization. And many organizations, both public, private, and nonprofit, can join and can send leaders to their, what I'm going to call specialty groups. So they have, Conference Board does have professional memberships for all of the major functions. whether, in HR, within HR, in the talent function, obviously diversity, equity, and inclusion, sales and marketing. Think of all the corporate disciplines that people might have an area of expertise in. They create what is basically a board of members that share experiences, share best practices, and they have an opportunity to really come together with peers, right, in their field and in a variety of industries to share those best practices.
Okay. I had not heard of that before, which means nothing, but just for my personal edification, I was interested. So thank you for sharing that.
Sure.
Now, if you could just describe your employment journey for our listeners.
Sure. So as you mentioned, I graduated from St. John's with a marketing degree. I started my career in client service and sales. So I spent probably the first, call it 8 to 10 years of my career in a variety of sales and sales leadership roles. Then I decided that I wanted to go back to school and get my MBA. So I went to Harvard. And after I went to Harvard, I went into the financial services industry. And I spent 10 years in financial services in a variety of business development, operational, and finance oriented roles, including investor relations, M&A, strategy. So I had all of those different kinds of functions while I was in financial services. And then,
Okay.
in,
Let me just clarify. M&A is mergers and acquisitions,
yes,
right?
mergers and acquisitions. Sorry.
No, I just want to make sure that our listeners, understand and can follow.
Yeah, for sure. So M&A, mergers and acquisitions. I basically worked directly for the managing director in charge of a division who was looking to grow their market share in a particular sector of the market, and I was leading one of the teams to look at potential acquisition opportunities to grow that business. So that's what I did there. And then in 2000, I joined ADP as the VP of Marketing and Strategy for one of their fast growing divisions in the PEO, Professional Employer Organization, called ADP Total Source. And I spent my first 9 years with ADP actually in Miami, Florida, again, in a variety of different marketing strategy and operating roles, including leading the division's benefits, open enrollment, and carrier relations function for all of the small business clients that ADP supported. And then after that, in 2009, I basically moved back to New Jersey to corporate headquarters to become the head of marketing for ADP. Did that for a few years. And then my last assignment with ADP was actually leading the organization's diversity, inclusion, and corporate social responsibility efforts until September of 2019 when I decided to retire and move back to Miami. So that's a bit of my sort of long-winded professional journey. And now I am enjoying, as I like to call it, rewirement, not retirement, because retirement to me connotes doing, not much. I'm actually doing quite a bit, but I'm doing a lot of things that I'm personally passionate about, including volunteering my time with a number of nonprofits. I sit on the board of a couple of other smaller organizations and nonprofits. And then I also do consulting work in the area of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
That's great. That's great. Now, as a chief diversity and inclusion officer, what were your favorite thing? What was your favorite aspect of that role? It just made you want to get up every morning and go into work because you really were so motivated.
Yeah, that's a great question. And it really truly was, as I look back at my career, Beverly, it really truly was my favorite role. And the reason why it was is because I had the opportunity to really impact and design what the culture of the organization, a very large global organization of 58,000 employees, in 40 plus different countries, what the culture of the organization was going to be like. And having the ability to have that level of influence and help the leadership of the company prioritize and invest in opportunities for advancing talent across the board, right? Diverse talent, the opportunity to create a culture where All of our associates felt like they belonged, that their voices were being heard, and that they had an opportunity to do their best work. So for me, just incredibly personally rewarding to be able to have that level of an impact at an organization, quite frankly, that is not just as large, but as important as ADP is in the sort of the sphere, if you will, right, of our economy. When you think about how many people ADP touches in terms of employees that they serve and pay.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, was there any aspect of that role that you didn't feel that great about, that you might have wanted to do differently? I don't know. It seems that there's always the ebbs and flows of
Sure.
whatever role you're in.
Sure. Listen, I think the challenge with any role like mine, which is a staff role and an influence role, I had a very small team, right? So I had a very small team responsible for very large, I would say, areas of responsibility in terms of things that we were trying to drive and to change. So I would say probably the biggest challenge in a role like that is just the fact that you're always going to be resource constrained, right? And that you're also forced to trade off oftentimes, priorities that you feel are equally important and that you want to pursue, but that you can't always pursue in the same, I would say, in the same rigor or with the same rigor that you'd like. So that's, I think, just in general a challenge of any staff function, and for people who are, I would say, accustomed to owning their results. I think one of the other challenges of being in a role like that is that you can do the architecting, right, and the designing of the strategy, and you can have all the things in place to help measure that success. But in the end, the real execution of the strategy relies upon the business, right? It relies upon the leaders in the business.
Yeah.
So, not having that, what I'm going to call direct control over how things that you have designed get implemented sometimes, can sometimes be a little frustrating. But I would say that's a small aspect compared to the more rewarding aspect of, being able to really change culture.
Yeah, you touched on something that's critical and that listeners really need to be aware of. Resources.
Hmm.
And given in today's economy and the impact of COVID, there are going to be fewer resources, financial and otherwise.
Sure.
Uh, and it's going to take understanding and commitment and shoulder to, I don't know, whatever the entity is, whatever the big boulder is, and everybody's going to have to be pulling together. And that's not going to be easy. That's not going to be easy because that's not what people have been used to.
Right. Well, listen, I think you touched on a very important theme of this conversation, right? Which is collaboration. Like, I don't know in any organization how any work gets done unless you're able to really collaborate, right, with others and others that may not be necessarily in your direct sphere of influence. So I think that the COVID reality has really highlighted the importance and the need to develop relationships with people outside of your direct sphere, to be able to look for creative ways to get to know other people and get to work with other people in a collaborative way. And I think that the technology, candidly has helped that to a certain extent, because even though we're not physically together in the office, let's say these days, the fact that you can use Zoom or Microsoft Teams or whatever platform you typically use to do video conferencing from your laptop, I mean that really does, I think, address some of the challenges of not being physically together.
No, it does. I am just amazed by how swiftly, and I would even say almost seamlessly, business and their businesses and their employees have just glommed onto these platforms and made it work.
Yeah.
I forget that people are still working, because I know everything is remote, but I forget what that means.
Yeah.
And I have called friends or texted friends, and they'll say, "Oh, I'll call you after I finish. I'm going to be on this. I'm going to be working on this until 5:30." And I'm like, "Oh wow, yes." Because I've been I've been doing, working from home for so long now. This is just second nature to me.
Right.
But people are actually doing work constructively, remotely.
Yeah.
And you're right. We need to be more collaborative. But what I have found is that we tend, before COVID, to be more insular,
Yeah.
that people tend to stay in their own little groups and interact with those that they've known for an extended period of time and they're familiar with and they're comfortable with. And given everything that's going on in the world today, to your point, there needs to be more collaboration and we need to step outside of what may be a comfort zone and get to know other people, because I'm an advocate of embracing
Yeah.
differences. You cannot live in this world, I don't think, and live in this world expansively and being all that you can be, unless and until you meet people where they are and you learn who they are. And you may not want to have anything else to do with them,
Yeah.
but you may find a friend. You may find common ground among people you never thought you would find. And that's just, I think we need to do more of that. And that's where I see diversity, equity, and inclusion coming into expanding our horizons in terms of interpersonal relationships.
Yeah, critical. I mean, it's really the underpinning of inclusion, right? So people, I always like to say, a lot of people ask me, well, what's the difference between diversity and inclusion? I said, well, diversity is the what, inclusion is the how, right? So diversity is really about, you know, what makes you who you are, or what characteristics, what's your background, gender, et cetera. Those are things, if you will, that describe who you are. But inclusion is really more, it's much more subtle than that, because it's really about how you make others feel.
It's the verb.
Exactly. So it's really
It's the
about,
verb.
it's about what are you doing to create an environment where, people are feeling comfortable that they can share aspects about their personal life or their personal perspectives on things, and not feel attacked and not feel like they're being, excluded all of a sudden
Right.
now in an out group that is no longer part of the organization. So I think it's such a critical element of
It is. And equity is the standard, you know,
exactly. Yeah, exactly.
a level playing field,
Yeah.
level platform, everyone treated the same.
I
Oh,
think
and
I
go
think
ahead.
it's an important point to remind our listeners too, the difference between equity and equality, because they're not
Mm,
the same thing, right?
no.
So, before I started doing this work, candidly, I would be the one to focus on equality, right? So I was always very concerned about making sure that everyone had equal access, equal rights, etc. And that's important. Don't get me wrong; it's very important, but it's not enough. And the reason why I say it's not enough is because if you only focus on equality, you're assuming that everybody starts from the same point. And the
You're right.
reality is that we don't all start from the same point. And the whole point of equity is to allow people the opportunity to start from that same point. And in some cases, we may need to help someone a little bit more than someone else because they're starting from way further behind, right? And so that's
Exactly.
that's the concept of equity, and I think that it is so important that when we're talking about this work, that people realize the difference, because as I said, a lot of companies that I've talked to that I work with today, that they're focused on equality, which is again very important, but it's insufficient.
But, there's a question around remediation. Those who may need it may not want it, especially if the label that's attached to it is something that has negative connotation, like affirmative action.
Yeah, yeah.
it means opportunities. You're given the opportunity. You have to do the work to succeed, but at least you're getting the opportunity. There are people that I've spoken to in law school and elsewhere who have shunned affirmative action. They don't want that label. They
Right.
want it on their own merit. And I'm like, are you kidding me? It's only giving you an opportunity.
Yeah, I think you raise a very interesting point, and I'll share something very personal, regarding this issue, because I understand why the people that you were talking to would say that, right? So, when I applied to Harvard, I never checked the box that I was Hispanic, and the reason I didn't check the box is because I didn't want to, for myself, be accepted because they were trying to quote unquote fill a quota, right? So
Right.
for me, it was very personal and very meaningful to not check the box, right? To say, hey, I got in here on my own merit. But now looking back, right? I mean, I'm glad I was accepted on my own merit, but the reality is that, was that the smartest thing to do? Because I would have been potentially not giving myself that opportunity that I was absolutely entitled to, because I had all the other qualifications.
Exactly.
It's just that sometimes, because of, again, the law of numbers, the law of averages, where you come from, etc. You don't see that representation the way in the same at the same level that maybe you would expect to see. So I guess my point is, I can see the argument on both sides, and I think what it comes down to is language. It's the way we talk about it, and it's making sure that we're clear that this isn't it isn't diminishing in any way the accomplishment or the opportunity for that individual.
Well, let me share a story, one of my stories, because it's just the opposite. I competed for law review when I was in law school, and they had an affirmative action component. You could submit a card, an index card with your name on it if you were a minority or socially and financially disadvantaged. I submitted the card. I knew what affirmative action was, and
Right.
I knew if it was an opportunity,
Sure.
and I knew that it could give me a leg up. Knew it was better to have and not have, and use it than not use it. So
Hmm.
I submitted the card. I didn't find out. I made law review. I didn't find out until 10 years after I had graduated from law school, when I was attending a law school event, and the dean said from the stage, we've had we've had an affirmative action component in our law review process, and we haven't used it in more than 10 years.
Wow.
I almost fell off my chair. I
Wow.
said, "Oh, I didn't know." I did, but I knew that I could write. I knew that I wrote well. And I knew that I would do whatever I had to do to make sure that my writing was up to snuff. So it was just giving me an opportunity
Yep.
to make law review. But I didn't know, to your point, that I had made it on my own without the benefit of affirmative action. But that a young man that I spoke to and tried to encourage to submit a card, he wouldn't do it.
Mm,
He didn't make law review. Now, who knows? He might have made it other if he had submitted a card,
right.
because he was many years after I was. I go back to law school periodically and talk to students. But it's just better to have and not need than to need and not have.
Yeah. So well said.
That's the way I look at things. But it's the stigma of affirmative action. And one of my dear friends who happens not to be a minority, she said, affirmative action means that one of my children may not get a job. And I said, well, it only means that the minority person is going to be given a shot. Your
That's
kids
right.
already have a shot. To use Lin Manuel's work, you want to get your shot, they've got one.
Right.
We're trying to get one. But I understood her concern as a parent.
Sure. Sure. Well, I think it goes back to educating yourself, right? In terms of, what do these terms really mean? and how do they get operationalized, right? Because at the end of the day, affirmative action is not about. I mean, it's not a forced quota system.
No.
I think her concern would be legitimate if, in fact, it was a forced quota system. But the reality is that today we're all competing for jobs. We're all competing for opportunities based on our qualifications. We just want to have a fair shot.
Exactly.
That's it. We just want to have a fair shot, because if, in fact, that wasn't needed, meaning if, in fact, we saw that in the large population that we had equal representation, meaning proportionate representation of women and people of color in leadership as we do in society, then this conversation wouldn't be necessary. If those things from a statistical standpoint were happening. And what I used to say when I was at ADP was, in a perfect world, if you have women making up 49.6% of your workforce, they should make up 49.6% of your senior leadership in a perfect world.
In a perfect world.
Now,
but we don't live in a perfect world.
We don't live in a perfect world. And so then we need to think about, well, what are the obstacles? What are the reasons why we don't live in a perfect world? And then what can we do to make the world more perfect, meaning to make the world more behave more in a way that we would expect to see if we didn't have all of these unconscious biases and all these other issues that get in the way, people getting selected for particular roles. And it goes back to the people making the decisions today, the majority of them are white and they're male. That's just a fact. I mean,
yes.
no matter what company you look at, the majority of leaders making those hiring decisions, if you will, those talent decisions, including at the board level, are white and they're male. Now, white males make up 37% of the population, but they make up over 80% of the boards. Well, isn't that interesting?
And I think there's an effort to keep it that way, isn't there?
Yeah, there is. So again, like when you look at those anomalies, and I call them anomalies because, again, in a normal, quote unquote, and I use the word normal in quotes because I'm talking about statistics, in a normal distribution, you would not expect to see that level of anomaly.
Right. I don't know what the answer is. And although this is not traditionally part of DEI, there's another component of differences that bothers me. Regional differences, geographic differences within our country.
Yeah.
I really hadn't thought of it that much until I started working for ADP and I started traveling around the country to the company's different locations. Mm-hmm. There are different ways of doing the same thing in different regions of this country.
Yeah.
There are different social mores in different areas of this country. And the uninitiated, and I really don't know how you become initiated, but those who, for example, move from New York to Georgia and to take a job, it's a different mindset from one place to the other.
Yeah, completely.
It is. Having spent not a lot of time, but spent some time in Florida, I know Florida is different than Georgia.
Yes.
And and it's also different than New York. California is different than New York. I've been in Minnesota. That's different. So it's like we're not a homogeneous country.
Nope, not far from it.
Far from it. But it seems like that's become, instead of a nice to have, a benefit, it seems to have become, let's call it an issue.
Mm-hmm.
It's a negative as opposed to a positive. Let's put it that way, generically.
Yeah.
And I'm always so interested to hear from people. I tried to make this podcast diverse in terms of geography. I've interviewed someone in Utah, Ohio. My niece happens to be a certified nurse's aide in South Dakota. So I'm trying to mix it up. And you being in Florida is great. Absolutely great. So, I want people to feel that they're included. They were included when I thought about this podcast. One of my friends asked me, to be on your podcast, do you have to have a degree? I said no. But it was something that I hadn't thought of. I knew what I was planning to do, but I hadn't done it yet. The people who started out, the first interviews were college educated people.
Right.
But that wasn't my plan. And now there are a number who haven't been. So I'm getting the diversity
Yeah.
that I want so that people will feel included when they tune into my podcast.
Well, listen, as we all know, there are so many paths to success, right? What do we call success? Success, first of all, is very personally defined.
Exactly.
And, if we're talking about financial independence or we're talking about, other levels of success, the reality is that those things are not necessarily tied to having a college degree, and that there's a lot of success that comes from individuals who have gone out on their own and become entrepreneurs, right? Have leveraged skill sets and done things with their not sort of life and knowledge in areas that have benefited others. So there's just so many, as you said, so many ways, so many diverse ways of thinking about this that touches geography, that touches background, that touches educational background.
Exactly.
I mean, the whole point.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, the whole point, I think, of all of this, I hope for the listeners, is that they can they can see themselves in someone, or a piece of themselves in everyone, which would be probably even more likely, and that there's so many things that unite us in terms of things that we share in common, as well as there are many things that divide us in the sense of you know the way we might have grown up, or the way that the things that we may have been exposed to or not exposed to, that can certainly shape the way we think and the way that we treat others. And so, hopefully people see the value in getting to know folks that are different from themselves. And that's the beauty of this podcast and of bringing in people from all different parts of the country and different roles, et cetera, is to learn from others who are different from you, who maybe think different from you. And maybe that can help you open up your own way of thinking about issues that would otherwise not have happened, had you not been exposed again to people who think differently from you.
Exactly. Exactly. What are you doing now? You said you're on boards, you're helping, you're consulting. To your point about entrepreneurs, I interviewed a young entrepreneur recently who wasn't college educated, very successful. So, I wanted to give that slant too, so
Definitely.
that, to your point,
Yeah, definitely.
you define your success for you. It's personal. And I think people need to understand that better. Success is not what your parents say.
Right.
Success,
Well,
success is what you want to do, what you feel will be gratifying or fulfilling to you.
yeah, and I think that is something that I think our generation, Beverly, maybe didn't understand until much later in our life or in our careers, right? So I think about my daughter's generation. She's 25, she's a millennial. Her definition of success is happiness. It's sort of doing things that she finds meaningful. So it's having a purpose, right? And that align with her values. And that's how
Yeah.
she defines success. Nowhere in that conversation is, making X dollars a year,
Yes.
right? But certainly when I was growing up, I think financial success was a key metric, if you will, or having a title, or having a certain position level. What were the ways that I think my generation defined success, which I think is limiting, quite frankly, because not that those things are not important. Of course they are. We all want to live comfortably, but that shouldn't be the primary driver of what it is that you do in your life, right? Or what makes you motivated to get up every morning. Hopefully the work that you do and the meaning that that work has for you, hopefully is what gets you motivated to get up in the morning.
I would say it differently. If you're motivated by money, have at it. If that gets you up in the morning and it motivates you to go to work and
Yeah.
become a productive member of society, have at it. It wouldn't work for me, but if it works for you, that's fine.
Yeah, no,
I,
listen, for sure. I mean, my only point was that I think for myself, speaking for myself, that I think I was caught up in that was the only way to define it.
well, yeah, I think, but you had defined it when you got a college degree.
Yeah,
For my family, that was successful after I got a degree.
right.
Because the people in my family were not. I think I had one uncle that had graduated from college, but I was the second one. I was the first woman.
Yeah,
So, that was success in my parents' eyes.
sure.
It didn't have a price tag on it, but, that was success. And then the next degree was more of a success. And then going to law school was just the end all be all. But it's different things for different people. And depending on how, to your earlier point, how you come up,
Yeah,
your journey has been. For some people who've been very deprived financially, very poor, money means a great deal.
absolutely. Right.
And I get it. I absolutely get it. But I think that it's the personal interaction, the fact that we're doing things remotely. We need proximity. We need to interact face to face, person to person.
Right.
And we're without that, it's almost like it's an out of body situation. We're not who we really are.
Yeah.
And I hear it from my friends. For me, it's not a problem, Rita. Like I said, I've been doing this for many years now. My friends are about to lose their minds,
Right. Yeah.
but I'm okay. this is this. I get a lot done, but then I'm the kind of person that, okay, if I make a list the night before of what I want to get done, I can do it the next day, and I just check off everything, and I feel a sense of accomplishment. But I'm concerned that people are not going out and they're not meeting people who
Mhm.
are different from them.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
not engaging and interacting. At least at work where people were different, they were thrown together.
Mm.
There was really no choice. But it's not happening now because they're not together.
Yeah.
So there's
Listen.
a lot of work to be done around inclusion and equity.
Yeah, for sure. And listen, I think some of the tech companies actually are leveraging a lot of so some of the newer social platforms where people can collaborate for work. They're actually leveraging some of those platforms to create environments that actually, in a sense, encourage and enforce people that are different from each other to get together and to learn more about each other. And I think that there are little things that we can all do in our interactions with folks, right? So I think about, when you're having a meeting with people that are from different parts of the country or different divisions or different parts of the world, you know, just taking a first few minutes of a meeting to genuinely recognize what people are working on and doing on a personal level, like getting to know people outside of just the work. So I think being more intentional about creating those personal relationships and getting people to feel comfortable talking about, what's it like working from home when you have, kids that are also learning remotely and you have to be on a Zoom call and, you know, your 8-year-old comes over and asks you to help with their homework. Those are real world scenarios today.
No, you're right. You're right. You're absolutely right. And in the beginning, in March, April, May, I think there was more consideration and understanding for particularly parents in that situation. But as the working remotely dragged on, it became less tolerated. At least for that's what I'm hearing from friends.
Yeah. Well,
So
this is where the challenge of leadership comes in, right? Because nothing's changed, unfortunately, for those parents, right? So the fact that this has gotten dragged out and it's going to continue to get dragged out until, hopefully we'll have a vaccine or something to get out of this mess. The reality is that those parents are still faced with the same challenges. They are still, unfortunately, being pulled into different directions at home because everyone's at home.
yes,
And so, I go back to the leaders, it's the leader's responsibility to sort of recognize and acknowledge, and particularly for women, because I think women tend to take on more of the responsibility for parenting, especially when it comes to kids and, homework and school. Oftentimes the moms are the ones that are the go-to for those things.
yeah, they're
And
the glue.
yeah, yeah. And so, unfortunately, as I said, the reality is the work still needs to get done. Companies still have to operate. They still have to get, their clients still need to be serviced, but we need to have more flexibility in the way that we do that work so that we can allow our employees the opportunity to flex when they need to take care of responsibilities that they have at home that right now they have no choice but to deal with.
No, I know you're right, but I think, quite frankly, the problem is that this pandemic has worn thin.
Yeah, yeah,
Nerves afraid, and people want to do what they want to do, and they want done what they need done when they need it done. It's just becoming less, people are becoming less tolerant and less understanding. But the circumstances haven't changed. And if we're to believe what's going on, it's getting worse.
yeah. Yeah, well, listen, this is the challenge of inclusion, right? It is about being able to recognize, those pressure points and the fact that different people bring different challenges, based on who they are and what's going on in their lives. And, again, going back to engagement, if we want to engage our employees to do their best work, you know, we have to recognize that they're not robots and that they, it's, again, from a leadership perspective, there is some responsibility to adapt to those changing, challenges.
Well, we both know that everyone who has a leadership role is not a good leader.
Sad but true, Beverly. Sad but true.
Yeah. It is it, unfortunately. Now, before we end, do you have any advice for people who find themselves exposed for the first time to a variety of different cultures that they're really unfamiliar with? People who do things differently
Yeah,
than they're used to. How do you embrace that?
sure,
And what
sure.
would that look like? I think that would be helpful.
Yeah, for sure. Listen, I would say I would start by practicing active listening, which is really being thoughtful and open to listen to how others think, and then being appropriately inquisitive, like curious about, hey, why do you think that? Right. So it's really about getting to know the perspective of others and being open to listening to why they might feel that way, right? So I think oftentimes we don't we don't really take the time to understand the why. And I think sometimes if we understood the why, we might be ourselves more tolerant, right, of those differences. I think just
No, it's true.
practicing that, active listening, seeking to understand, I think is important. And along the same lines, sort of putting ourselves in the shoes of someone else, right? So, you know, oftentimes, it's easy to be critical about people and about people's reactions in certain situations, but unless you've walked a mile in their shoes, it's unfair, right, to judge someone's reaction or statement or point of view without really understanding and living kind of their experience. So this again goes hand in hand with getting to know others and getting to know about others on a more personal level so that you get to understand a little bit more about their backgrounds and where they come from. because that might help you understand why they might respond in a certain way in a situation that you may not agree with.
No, it's communication. It definitely is communication, listening, asking questions,
Yeah,
just being receptive to exploring.
exactly. Yeah,
Not coming in
being curious.
being
Yeah,
curious and not having a closed mind, not judging things in advance, not
exactly.
thinking that being open to what you hear and what you're told, and considering it even if it's different than what you thought.
Exactly. And look, I mean, there's no look, individuals are going to have different points of view on things, and that's, I think, to be expected. I always like to say, showing someone respect is really about acknowledging that their point of view has value, just like your point of view has value.
Yes.
You may in the end agree that you can't agree on the particular issue, but that doesn't necessarily undermine the other individual's value. And so I think that that's, showing people that, again, that level of respect, I think is important in dealing with folks that are different from us in many ways.
You're absolutely right. We just need to start practicing at least the golden rule: do unto others as you would have others do unto you.
Yeah, yeah, and
And I didn't know that there was also a platinum rule:
yes,
do unto others as they want you to do unto them.
that was going to be my additive. Yep,
I was going
absolutely.
to say, oh my goodness, how would I know?
Well, there you go. It comes back full circle, right?
Right, you have to ask.
You
To your
have to
point,
ask. Exactly.
that I mean, if we start there, I think we could make great strides, Rita. That's just my personal
Yeah,
opinion.
no, I so agree, and we may surprise ourselves, right, in terms of how little we know, right, about others when we make assumptions without really taking the time to really get to know each other. You might be surprised.
No, I'm sure.
Yeah.
I'm always surprised. My mouth is always in an oh, I didn't know. But that's living life, and I appreciate the interaction with others. And although I miss it, this podcast keeps me engaged because I've met so many different people with different stories, different journeys, different experiences. And I hopefully people are listening and they're getting something from it.
Yeah.
But I so appreciate you taking the time today to share your employment journey and your DEI viewpoint. It's been very compelling, and I appreciate it because I've learned a great deal, and I hope our listeners have too.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity, obviously, to reconnect with you and also to connect with your listeners. And listen, we're all on this journey together. We live in the same planet, in the same society. Hopefully, we continue to give each other that same level of respect and commitment and humanity that we all crave.
I agree. Thank you so much, and let's keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thanks, Beverly.
Thanks for listening to Your Employment Matters with Beverly Williams. If you found this podcast helpful, please subscribe and leave a review. I truly appreciate your support, and that helps other listeners find the podcast. If you have a comment, question, or suggestion, you can reach me at bawilliams@youremploymentmatters.com. My book, Get the Job Done, is available on Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com. Please join me again next week. Until then, remember to embrace change and differences.
This podcast is part of the Sound Advice FM network. Sound Advice FM, women's voices amplified.